Today, the over 1,000 people who call the Belcher Islands home live in the hamlet of Siniqilwaq, but this wasn't always the case. In 1949, the Canadian government sent a patrol of the Eastern Arctic by plane, which captured a snapshot of the Belcher Islands during a time which, while now known to the wider world, was still isolated with only the occasional visit from scientific parties or Anglican clergy. This patrol shows how the islands were populated nearly 3/4 of a century ago. Back then, only 165 Siniqilwarmwit, the local Inuit, lived on the archipelago. In 6 Illigit Numagivaktangit, or seasonal communities used for hunting and gathering. There was a large community of up to 5 Karmaks, or Inuit dwellings, on western Qikiqtani Island. Qikiqtani Island is now uninhabited, but is now used as a source of soapstone, which supplies a local carving industry. 3 other communities were at Howard Point, Lilico Point, and Eskimo Harbor, which is close to modern-day Siniqilwaq. The southern portion of the archipelago was home to smaller Inuit communities at O'Leary Island and French Island. Despite infrequent contact from the Canadian government or Anglican clergy, the islands weren't as isolated as expected. The Siniqilwarmwit would travel to the Quebec mainland to hunt, by kayak or in the winter, over the ice with Qimit and Kamutik. Inuit from the Quebec mainland would also come to the Belcher Islands to hunt and would even winter on the King George and Sleeper Islands for a year or two. By the 1950s, education was becoming a priority for both the Inuit and Canadian government officials, and the Qikiqtani Inuit Association noted that school placement in Qikiqtaluk was often a means for the government to choose a location where to concentrate their services. By 1960, 2 settlements existed on the island, North Camp and South Camp, with a school being built in South Camp that same year. South Camp was abandoned in 1971, and the residents had to move to North Camp, with the Siniqilwarmwit not being provided any assistance to move or any housing when they arrived in North Camp. Many felt pressured to move, and it was hard without assistance, with some being forced to kill their sled dogs or Qimit as they could not bring them to North Camp, which would soon be renamed to Siniqilwaq. This quote highlights some of the hardships they had to face, and the Qikiqtani Truth Commission Community Histories described in great detail their issues and what the Belcher Islands were like in this period. It was an invaluable source for this. It highlights the confusing, contradictory, and disorganized manner in which officials dealt with the Belcher Islands and its people. Worth reading. North Camp would be renamed to Siniqilwaq in 1975, and is the last permanent settlement on the Belcher Islands, with over 1,000 people, mostly Siniqilwarmwit. Over time, you can see how the population, while smaller, was once spread about the islands, but became more centralized to make it easier for the Canadian government to administrate. It is worth noting that some Canadian officials early on even considered moving all the Belcher Island inhabitants off the islands into parts of the Hudson Bay coast, instead of providing services to the islands.